It's very relaxing. And I feel like a lot of people tend to undermine just how much of an influence those first impressions make. Because there are certain things that people are going to assume about you based off of just how you look or what you say to them when you first meet them. And they're going to use their many years of experience and inner monologues to craft some sort of persona about you. And they're going to assume that that persona is you. If you don't craft a persona for yourself by telling them something about yourself, then they're going to craft that persona by themselves. And there's a limited time window which you have to leave the first impression. And there is a limited time window of amount of time you have to wait until you can make the next impression on that person. So quite often you run into this kind of situation where you fail to introduce yourself properly, and a person sees something, weird on your eyebrow, and they make some sort of impression about you, and then that impression is carried on to the future, where they voice a bunch of different opinions about you. They gossip about you. They assume different kinds of things, even if those kinds of things may not be necessarily true. So, as you can see, I'm an author, and I have a little bit of a proclivity for psychology and philosophy and stuff like that. Um, I founded a philosophy club back in my high school many, many years ago, and that's an interesting experience in of itself because first of all, we were trying to look for a sponsor, me and my friend at the time, and we couldn't find a sponsor, and we looked around and we asked for every single person that could possibly sponsor us because this number one step of the form was to get 20 signatures. That's so easy in high school. You can just walk up to people and be like, "Hey, sign this." And they're like, "What is it for?" And you're just like, "Don't worry about it." And they'll sign it. And number two is finding a sponsor. So I started going to every single teacher asking if they can sponsor it or do they know who else can sponsor it. And they gave me a bunch of suggestions. My teachers did. And the things that they said were roughly like, hey, you should go and see this teacher. And that teacher actually happened to be the sister of one of my friends at the time. So the sister of one of my friends at the time was a physics teacher in the school. And she was also the head of theater, which is very good because I had also auditioned for theater around the same time, and I was creating the philosophy club. And I actually ended up being in theater. I ended up being the secretary of the theater department and doing a lot of the IT and acting work behind the scenes. So that was a very neat coincidence. But she first was introduced to me right after I had met her through like math tutoring or something, as the guy who wanted to start a philosophy club, and he really didn't have anyone to guide it. And I asked her if she could temporarily become the head of the philosophy club, and she says, sure, but I can't do it forever because I have a lot of other stuff on my hands, which coincidentally ended up being the other clubs that I also started to get involved in after. She said, I have a lot of stuff on my hands, so I can walk you down to the office and we can ask, uh, you know, if a certain other kind of, you know, no, I'm misremembering the story. I'm an idiot. She said we can walk down to the office and I can present myself as the sponsor of your club, but then I've suggested you reach out to this specific history teacher who would be like a really good sponsor for your club. And that history teacher had a very Hispanic name. So we walked down to the office and we put her in as the official sponsor of the club. Due to the change, we discussed the matter with like the person that was arranging all of the stuff. And then the very next day, I needed to send an email to the history teacher because he kept not being in his office. So I ultimately ended up sending the email to that philosophy teacher, and said philosophy, Jesus Christ. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to call the Lord's name in vain, but I keep forgetting everything. History teacher, the specific history teacher. There was no philosophy class in my school. That's why I was founding the club. That specific history teacher was not in his classroom. So I needed to get his email off of the school directory. So I did. I got his email off of the school directory. And it turns out that that very common Hispanic name was the last name for a bunch of other people in the school directory, which meant that I had ended up contacting his mother, who also worked in that school that I went to in HR. I had ended up contacting a janitor, and I ended up contacting another teacher with that last name. None of them responded to me, thankfully, except for the history teacher in question. and we ended up founding a philosophy club with him. And I ended up going to his room several times after classes, and he would then draw like the ship of Theseus on the board, or draw little thought experiments, or we'd talk about Neil deGrasse Tyson or something, and he would say, "Well, this is just something that I was thinking about. Maybe this is something that you would like for the philosophy club to talk about or make little presentations." I'm like, "Yeah, we can make one about the lever paradox, the train principle, the trolley problem, right?" And he's just like, "Yeah, I think that'd be good." So me and my vice president at the time, as well as the newly sworn in cabinet of officers that was not involved in the philosophy club at all. Two of them were literally just my friends that I ended up bringing in, and another few were members of this friend group that I later tried becoming friends with, which failed miserably. And I tried to bribe people by saying, there's snacks. There's snacks, come in, get some snacks. And realistically, people only ended up coming for snacks and they ended up staying, and they didn't want to take the after school bus. They had ways of getting home. So he sort of just sat in the chairs and listened to our boring presentations while eating snacks. And my vice president was just like, "Did you really just bribe people with like Instagram mentions and snacks just to get in this club?" And I said, "Yeah." And at the time, I was sort of trying to do a thing where I was franchising it to other schools. That never worked. And the next year, my senior year, the history teacher actually managed to leave, and we couldn't get another philosophy meeting going, which means that we were just sort of stuck with the status quo, and we couldn't be bothered to find anyone else to host the club, and then we ended up having a teacher in the same room who was by no means fit to teach that club. She appeared to be very nice, and then she later thought that the best method of teaching people was to scream at us. And what was more interesting was that she just got out of college. So she was like 23 years old, and yet she was shouting at us high school students, which is ironic because the age gaps between some of the high school football players and their girlfriends, their younger girlfriends, was about the same as the age gap between her and me at the time, being 19 years old almost by the time that I graduated. So yeah, I'm not saying that's right. I think that's very wrong in both cases. But it's just the truth. That was the truth. And she was not fit to guide that club, so the club shut down. Nevertheless, my interest in philosophy never died down. Um, I am interested in it, and I like to speak about it with other people. The issue is, particularly on podcasts also, but the issue is that I couldn't be bothered to proclaim myself as one of those people who knows some intuitive truth about the world that the rest of the people don't know. There's so many things that you could read. You could read the Tibetan Book of the Dead. You could read Revolt Against the Modern World if you feel like torturing yourself. You could read Ride the Tiger if you want to look at it for a critical lens. You could read the Bible. You could read any other religious book. You could even read the Talmud. You can read literally any single source of knowledge in the world, and it would give you a better interpretation of the world and why it's here and why it's meant to be than I ever could. Because I am a young man, which by proxy means that I haven't had much worldly experiences. And sure, I've been to multiple countries, I've been to many cities, I've met many people, I've had many interesting experiences, but I am by no means fit enough to talk about all of the topics of the world. So you should not expect this on this podcast. So, you may have inferred thus far, as I have introduced myself, that I am an author. I have an interest in psychology and philosophy, both of which, I quite like to study. I have this weird sense of humor. I make a lot of run on sentences and word salad sentences that I attempt to moderate myself in, but I always end up coming back to what I was talking about because I do not like circular reasoning. I like to talk. I do not like other people that like to talk. I tend to prefer people who are the strong silent type, as Gandolfini said. But there's a particular lack of those people out there in the modern world now. I'm also not one of those people, coincidentally, that's going to talk about how bad the modern world is and how bad modern women are or any of that sort. I'm actually quite satisfied with the way that a lot of things are. But I think that modernity, in its very, basic and root forms, has caused a lot of people to be disconnected from themselves. That there's not enough of a real challenge. Recently, I've been reading a lot into the works of Yukio Mishima, and particularly when it comes to Yukio Mishima and how he views, just sort of the world, not women specifically, because Yukio Mishima had a lot of views on women that I'm not going to parrot here. but how he views the world and how it is structured in his eyes. And he viewed it as humans living too long, humans not being able to die a death of honor, humans not being to sacrifice themselves for a greater cause. Their stories having a very unclear, mushy beginning of malformed memories and not remembering the first 3 years of your life and watching bullshit on television and hearing stories and not being able to form meaningful or sentimental memories up until a later age, and a bunch of failed attempts at falling in love and of creating something great that always end up in misery, because no matter what you've done, there are a million people before you that came in your position that have been able to create greater works of art than you ever have, that have been able to create greater speeches than you ever will be able to make, that have created greater symphonies than you will ever know how to make, that have lifted more weights than you will ever weigh. So, in no matter what area of life you enter, it is almost impossible that you will become the best person in the world at that craft. And even if you become the best person in the world at it, there are multiple people throughout history that have been historically better at that thing than you, and you are just sort of trying to step in their footsteps and trying to live up to the master.